I was 26 years old, broke, living in my parents' basement, and stuck in a job I hated. I had been out of college for 2 years, and my life felt like a never-ending loop of waking up, going to work, coming home, and scrolling through social media where everyone seemed to be doing better than me. My friends were climbing the career ladder, traveling the world, buying houses, and here I was, barely scraping by with my office job at a small insurance company. I had always dreamed of being an entrepreneur, but it felt like a distant fantasy. I thought about starting something on the side, but the fear of failure and the comfort of a steady paycheck kept me locked in place. Everything changed when I took a long, hard look at my life one weekend. I was scrolling through Reddit, again, when I stumbled across a post about someone who built a successful business while working a 9-to-5 job. They started small, learned as they went, and now they were making 6 figures a year with their side hustle. I was hooked. That was it. I knew then that if I didn't try something, I would never be happy. It wasn't an immediate success, though. I had no business experience, no connections, and honestly, no clue what I was doing. I needed a starting point. The first thing I did was research. I spent hours, day after day, reading articles, watching YouTube videos, and following successful entrepreneurs on social media. Everyone said the same thing: find a problem and solve it. I started thinking about the problems I faced in my own life. The biggest one? My job. I hated it. But what if I could create something that would make people's work lives easier? Something simple, practical, but impactful? After weeks of brainstorming, I came up with an idea for a software tool that would help small businesses streamline their invoicing and payment processes. It sounded like a niche market, but I figured that small business owners were probably facing similar frustrations to what I had experienced in the past. I spent the next few months learning basic coding and design, all while still working my 9-to-5 job. I wasn't particularly good at it, but I was determined. Every night after work, I would sit at my desk and code, then go to bed exhausted, wake up, and do it all again the next day. I learned a lot the hard way, like how to avoid feature creep and how to focus on building something simple, yet functional. I launched my first version of the software after about 4 months of work. It wasn't perfect, but it was functional, and that was enough. I put together a website, wrote some basic copy, and launched it on a small budget. I didn't have any money to invest in ads or marketing, so I relied on word of mouth and social media. I created a Reddit thread in one of the small business subreddits, explaining the tool I had built and how it could save time and money for small business owners. I had no expectations. To my surprise, I got a few people who were interested and even left comments on the thread. At first, the growth was slow. I had maybe 1 or 2 customers a week. But as word started to spread, things picked up. I used every dollar I made to reinvest in the business. I started running targeted Facebook ads, invested in SEO for my website, and started blogging about the challenges small businesses face. As my customer base grew, so did my confidence. By the end of the first year, I was making $2,000 a month, which was a huge deal for me at the time. The real breakthrough came when I landed a partnership with a small business networking group. I had reached out to them cold, offering to give their members a discount on my software in exchange for exposure. They agreed, and the influx of new customers that came from that partnership gave my business the boost it needed. By the second year, I had reached $10,000 in monthly revenue. The business was growing, and so was my knowledge. I continued to refine the product, listened to my customers' feedback, and kept learning about business management. However, just as things were starting to look up, I encountered a major challenge. My day job was becoming more demanding. I was working late nights and weekends to keep up with the increased workload. My side business was thriving, but I was exhausted. I realized that I couldn't keep doing both. I had to make a decision: stick with my steady job or take the plunge and go full-time with my business. After weeks of sleepless nights, I made the decision to quit my job. I wasn't 100% sure it would work out, but I knew that I had to try. The first few months were terrifying. There were days when I didn't know how I was going to pay my bills. There were months when sales were lower than I expected. But I kept pushing through, learning, adapting, and trying new strategies. Eventually, things started to stabilize. I hired my first employee, a developer to help me with the back end of the software, and outsourced marketing and customer service. This allowed me to focus on scaling the business. By the end of the third year, I had hit my first $100,000 in revenue. That was the moment I realized I had built something real. It wasn't just a side hustle anymore. It was a legitimate business. I reinvested the profits into improving the software and expanding into new markets. The growth was steady but consistent, and by the fifth year, I had hit $500,000 in revenue. I had a small team, a stable income, and a product that was making a real impact on people's lives. Looking back, it feels surreal. The road was long and full of struggles, but it was all worth it. My life today is drastically different from where it was 5 years ago. I'm financially free, I can travel, and I get to work on something I'm passionate about every single day. More importantly, I've learned that success isn't just about money or achievements. It's about having the courage to take that first step and not giving up when things get tough. If you're reading this and you're stuck in a job you hate, or you're unsure about starting your own business, just know that it's possible. It's not going to be easy. You will fail. You will want to quit. But if you push through and keep learning, you'll be amazed at what you can achieve. Don't let fear hold you back. Take that leap, even if it's small at first, and start building something that you're proud of. It's the hardest thing I've ever done, but it's also the most rewarding. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. So, let me tell you how I went from broke to owning a business that's now bringing in a solid 6 figures annually. This is a story of persistence, failure, and finding a way when it seemed like there was no way. About 5 years ago, I was living paycheck to paycheck in a cramped apartment in a city I barely knew. I had just moved to New York, hoping the big city would offer me the opportunities one couldn't find back home. I had a degree in marketing, but the reality of landing a good job was nothing like what I had imagined. I had spent my first year working low-wage jobs, trying to make ends meet. I was exhausted, stressed out, and honestly, starting to feel like a failure. One day, I was talking to an old college friend, Alex, who was running a small e-commerce business selling custom-printed t-shirts. He told me about his business and how it had started as a side hustle but was now supporting him full-time. At first, I didn't take it seriously. I don't know anything about running a business, I thought. But the more he explained it, the more I realized there was something appealing about the idea of running my own gig. I knew I had no money to invest, but I also knew I couldn't keep going down the same miserable path. The first big turning point came when Alex mentioned that he started his business with a print-on-demand model. In other words, no upfront costs for inventory, no dealing with shipping, just the design work and marketing. That was something I could get behind. I didn't have any savings, but I had an old laptop, a few basic design tools I could learn to use, and a burning desire to make something of myself. For the next month, I spent nearly every waking moment learning everything I could about print-on-demand businesses. I watched endless YouTube videos, read blog posts, and joined Facebook groups full of other aspiring entrepreneurs. I learned how to use Photoshop to create designs, how to set up an online store, how to market on social media. I even learned a bit about SEO. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The first time I launched my store, I felt like I was doing everything right. I spent hours designing my products, setting up the website, and making everything look professional. Then I waited, and waited, and waited. For weeks, there were no sales. My website was a ghost town. At first, I was frustrated. Was I doing something wrong? Was the market oversaturated with t-shirts? But then I remembered a piece of advice that Alex had given me. If you don't sell anything in the first month, it's not the end of the world. Keep pushing, keep learning, and keep experimenting. So that's exactly what I did. I went back to the drawing board and started tweaking my marketing strategy. I spent time on Instagram, posting designs, and reaching out to potential customers. I joined influencer groups and asked smaller influencers if they'd be willing to promote my shirts in exchange for a free product. Slowly but surely, things began to change. I made my first sale after about a month of grinding, and that sale felt like the biggest win ever. But even with that first sale, I was far from out of the woods. My first few months were a blur of late nights, trial and error, and frustration. For every sale I made, there were 10 times I felt like giving up. There were days when I couldn't figure out what I was doing wrong, or when the orders were too few and far between to make ends meet. It was around the fourth month when things really started to shift. I decided to focus on one niche that I had an undeniable passion for: vintage-style band shirts. I loved music, and I noticed that there was a growing market for retro-style tees with classic band logos and designs. I began creating designs inspired by music, incorporating vintage graphics with modern twists. It was a gamble, but it paid off. People were hungry for this kind of merchandise. Suddenly, I started to get noticed. Orders came in faster than I could keep up with. I found myself reaching out to suppliers to get better quality shirts and expand my product range. I reinvested every dollar I made into scaling the business: new designs, better ads, and more marketing strategies. I also started offering limited edition drops that created a sense of urgency and exclusivity for my customers. I was still far from comfortable, but at least I had momentum. The real game changer, however, came a year after I first launched my store. I reached out to a popular YouTube influencer who reviewed products and often showcased unique clothing brands. I offered him a custom shirt in exchange for a review, and much to my surprise, he agreed. The video he posted skyrocketed my brand's visibility. The next morning, I woke up to hundreds of new orders. That was the moment I realized I could finally quit my day job. After a year of doing everything myself, designing products, managing customer service, handling orders, I finally hired a virtual assistant to help with customer support. It was one of the best decisions I made. With that extra time freed up, I could focus on growing my business, refining my marketing strategies, and pushing out new product lines. By the time I hit the 2-year mark, I was running a full-time business with a growing team, all thanks to a simple idea and a lot of hustle. But of course, running a business isn't all rainbows and butterflies. There were still tough moments. I've had to deal with unexpected supply chain issues, bad reviews, product returns, and more. There have been months where things didn't go as planned, and I wondered if I was about to lose everything. But I've learned to embrace those tough times as part of the process. If you're not failing, you're not growing. Now, 5 years in, I'm proud of what I've built. I've been able to hire a small team to help manage different aspects of the business, and I'm earning a solid 6 figures a year. My days are still long, but they're filled with a sense of purpose and excitement I never thought I'd feel. I've even expanded into other product lines and built a strong community of loyal customers who are as passionate about my designs as I am. Looking back, it feels surreal. I remember those first few months of doubt, the long nights where I wasn't sure if it would ever work out. But through persistence, learning, and finding my niche, I was able to turn my side hustle into a real business. If you're reading this and feeling stuck, just know that persistence pays off. It might not be easy, but if you're willing to learn, adapt, and keep pushing, you can make it. You don't need a ton of money to start. You just need the willingness to start and the determination to keep going. That's all I had, and it's what's brought me this far. So, if you're on the fence about starting your own thing, take the plunge. Trust me, it's worth it. Back in 2020, I was just another 23-year-old stuck in a job that barely paid the bills. I was working in retail, trying to figure out how to climb up the corporate ladder. But with each passing month, it felt like I was just treading water, moving further away from my goal of financial independence and freedom. I had dreams of building something that would give me more control over my life, something I could call my own. But I had no idea where to start. One night, after another shift in the store, I found myself scrolling through Reddit, browsing the entrepreneurship and side hustle threads. I had heard the usual stories: people starting businesses from nothing, working late nights, struggling for months, and eventually succeeding. I felt a spark of inspiration, but I had no idea where to begin. I had a few $100s in savings, mostly from my day job, but I wasn't ready to quit yet. The idea of starting a business seemed overwhelming, especially with no clear path forward. But after a couple of weeks of research, I stumbled upon a niche in the e-commerce space: custom apparel. T-shirts, hoodies, mugs, products that people could personalize with unique designs. I knew the market for custom items was growing, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't just about selling a product. It was about creating a brand that resonated with people. So I started small. I used my savings to buy a cheap heat press machine, a few blank t-shirts, and a design software subscription. I spent weeks learning how to use Photoshop, watching YouTube tutorials on how to create compelling designs, and experimenting with different styles. I didn't know what I was doing, but I figured I would learn along the way. The first batch of designs was basic: just some funny slogans and catchy phrases that I thought would appeal to a certain group of people. But I quickly learned that creating a product was only half the battle. The real challenge was selling it. I launched my website, set up an Instagram page, and hoped for the best. I didn't have any marketing experience, no budget for ads, and no real audience. But I wasn't going to let that stop me. I reached out to a few influencers in the niche, offered them free products in exchange for shoutouts, and started posting regularly on social media. At first, the results were disheartening. I had a few sales here and there, but it wasn't enough to even cover the costs of the materials. I was stuck in a cycle of spending money on products and making just enough to barely break even. I didn't know what I was doing wrong. Was my product not good enough? Was the market too saturated? My self-doubt started creeping in, and I considered quitting multiple times. But I remembered something I read on Reddit. Entrepreneurship wasn't just about success, it was about persistence. So, I kept pushing forward. I analyzed my data, looked at my competition, and made adjustments. The first major change came when I started focusing on building a community rather than just selling products. I started interacting more with my followers on social media, asking for feedback on my designs, running polls on what they wanted to see next. Slowly, I began to understand my audience better and realized they didn't just want cool designs. They wanted something that represented their values, their interests, and their personalities. The turning point came when I released a limited edition line of t-shirts for a popular meme that was trending at the time. I made sure to time it right and promoted the launch aggressively across my channels. To my surprise, the response was incredible. People loved the idea, and the orders started flooding in. It was a small win, but it felt like a huge victory. That's when I realized I had found something that resonated with my audience. I wasn't just selling t-shirts anymore. I was offering a piece of culture, something people wanted to be a part of. Over the next few months, I refined my designs, improved my marketing strategy, and scaled my efforts. I reinvested every dollar back into the business, upgrading my equipment, hiring a part-time assistant to help with order fulfillment, and even experimenting with paid ads. I started seeing real growth. By the end of my first year, I had hit 5 figures in revenue. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was enough to give me confidence that I was on the right path. But even as things started to improve, I faced new challenges. Cash flow was always tight, and inventory management became a nightmare. I had to learn how to streamline my operations, work with suppliers, and manage logistics, none of which I had any prior experience in. There were months when I thought I was going to run out of money and have to shut everything down. But somehow, I kept finding ways to make it work. Around the beginning of my second year, I decided to focus more on automating my business. I integrated my online store with print-on-demand services so that I wouldn't have to keep inventory. This was a game changer. It freed up a lot of my time and allowed me to scale faster without the risks associated with overstocking products. I also took a deeper dive into paid advertising, focusing on Facebook and Instagram ads, which eventually became my primary source of revenue. By the time I hit year 3, my business was operating smoothly, and I had a team of 3 people working with me. I had more time to focus on strategy, new product designs, and expanding the brand. I also built an email list, which became a valuable asset for marketing campaigns. The most surprising part of this journey was realizing how much of it was about mindset. I had learned to embrace failure, pivot when things didn't work, and trust in the process, even when it seemed impossible. Today, my brand is making a solid 6-figure income, and I've managed to quit my full-time job. I work for myself, from home, and I'm incredibly grateful for the journey. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I wanted to give up, but the lessons I've learned have been invaluable. The most important one: success doesn't come overnight. But if you're willing to put in the work, learn from your mistakes, and stay persistent, you can build something that lasts. This isn't the end of my journey. I have bigger goals now. But if there's one thing I want others to take away from this, it's that you don't need to have it all figured out from the start. Just start with what you have and keep going, even when it feels like nothing is working. It's all part of the process. I'm an entrepreneur, but not the kind who starts businesses in the traditional sense. I didn't go to college, didn't have some fancy startup with venture capital, and I definitely didn't have some revolutionary idea that made me millions overnight. Instead, my story is one of persistence, adaptability, and a constant push to better myself. This is my journey, and it starts with a decision that changed everything. In my early 20s, I was stuck. I had a low-paying job at a small company in a city that I didn't love. Every morning, I woke up with a sense of dread, barely scraping by. I had dreams, but the reality of my situation felt like a mountain I couldn't climb. The world around me seemed so big and full of opportunity, but I couldn't see how I could fit into it. Then, one day, I stumbled upon an online forum, one of those side hustle communities where people share their stories about how they made extra money outside their day job. Some were selling things on eBay, others were flipping furniture, and a few were running YouTube channels. The more I read, the more I realized that I wasn't stuck. I could make something happen, too. It wasn't going to be easy, but at that moment, I decided that I was going to try. The first thing I did was research. I looked into various ways people were making money on the side. I wanted something that could fit around my current job, something that wouldn't require a massive upfront investment. Eventually, I settled on e-commerce. I figured I could start selling products online and build a little business on the side. I didn't know a thing about e-commerce, but that was okay. I had Google, and more importantly, I had the drive to learn. I started by buying some cheap items in bulk from a wholesaler. The plan was simple: buy low, sell high. I created an online store, and after a few weeks of working on it in my spare time, I launched. It wasn't glamorous, and the sales came in slowly at first, but it was enough to keep me going. It wasn't long before I realized that the market I had picked was oversaturated. My margins were thin, and the competition was fierce. But I didn't give up. I kept researching, tweaking my product listings, and learning more about marketing. Eventually, I decided to pivot. Instead of selling generic products, I would focus on a niche market, something more specialized that had less competition. After some brainstorming, I decided on custom-made home decor. I started small, designing and crafting simple items myself. My first product was a personalized wooden sign. I took photos of my work, set up an Etsy shop, and put myself out there. I wasn't expecting to get rich. I just wanted to make something that people would appreciate. Slowly but surely, sales trickled in. A few people left positive reviews, and that was enough to push me to keep going. I reinvested the small profits into new materials, improved my designs, and expanded my shop. The turning point came about 6 months into my journey. One of my products went viral. I'm not talking about millions of views or a major influencer pickup, but it got shared enough times on social media that my sales skyrocketed for a week. That one viral moment was enough to give my shop a solid foundation, and I started getting consistent orders. The small profits I had been reinvesting now turned into more substantial revenue. But even with the boost in sales, I was far from being comfortable. I worked long hours, often into the late night, filling orders and keeping up with customer service. I didn't have much help at that point. It was just me. I learned how to handle the logistical side of things, shipping, inventory management, and tracking, and I began to streamline my operations. What really helped me take things to the next level was my commitment to customer service. I made sure every order was perfect, and I went above and beyond to respond to customer inquiries quickly. People appreciated the personal touch, and many returned to buy more items. However, there were plenty of setbacks. I faced shipping delays, customer complaints, and even a few angry messages. At one point, I thought about quitting. The pressure was overwhelming, and I was constantly worried about making mistakes. But instead of giving up, I asked myself one question: what's the worst that could happen if I keep going? The worst, I realized, was that I would fail. But I had already failed many times before, and that never stopped me. I decided to push forward. The next phase of my journey was when I took the plunge and hired my first employee, a friend who had been helping me with the shipping when I needed extra hands. This was a huge step. I had to let go of some of the control, which was terrifying. But it was necessary if I wanted to scale up. With his help, I was able to focus more on growing the business and less on the day-to-day operations. In the months that followed, my business continued to grow. I started experimenting with new products, expanding my marketing efforts, and reaching out to potential influencers for collaborations. There were times when I thought I had figured everything out, only to face a new challenge. But with each new hurdle, I adapted. I wasn't afraid of failure anymore because I understood that failure was just a stepping stone to success. After about 3 years, I reached a point where my business was making more than enough to support me full-time. I had expanded my product line, hired more employees, and even invested in better tools to help with production. What started as a side hustle was now my main source of income, and I was finally doing what I loved. But the real lesson I learned wasn't about business, it was about perseverance. The journey wasn't linear. There were plenty of highs and lows, and there were times when I wanted to throw in the towel. But the key to my success was simple. I never gave up. Today, I'm running a company with a team of 10 people, and we're consistently growing. My business isn't huge, but it's mine, and I'm proud of what I've built. The most important part is that I'm in control of my future. I'm no longer waiting for some mythical moment of success to come knocking at my door. I created my own success by learning, adapting, and, most importantly, refusing to quit. If you're reading this and feeling stuck, know that you're not alone. It took me years to get to where I am now, and there were many times when I didn't think I'd make it. But if you put in the work and keep pushing forward, you will get there. Success isn't about having a perfect plan or a smooth ride. It's about learning from your mistakes and never giving up. That's what makes an entrepreneur. I never thought I'd become an entrepreneur. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood, the idea of starting a business seemed like a fantasy. My parents worked hard to make ends meet, and the thought of me doing anything other than a 9-to-5 job was laughable. But here I am, 7 years later, running a successful tech startup with a team of 50 employees. And looking back, I'm still amazed by how everything came together. The journey didn't start with a eureka moment or a sudden flash of inspiration. It started with frustration. I was working at a corporate job in a mid-sized tech company where I was just another cog in the wheel. I had a decent salary and benefits, but I felt like I was stagnating. I had ideas, I had ambition, but I didn't have the freedom to pursue anything beyond my day-to-day tasks. One day, I was chatting with a colleague over lunch, and we started talking about the inefficiencies in the workplace. Specifically, how much time was wasted on manual tasks that could easily be automated. I don't know if it was the casual nature of the conversation or the fact that I was desperate for something new, but it sparked an idea. I thought, what if there was a way to make these processes more efficient? It wasn't a groundbreaking thought. A lot of businesses have tools and software to help automate tasks, but what I realized was that most of them were either too complicated, too expensive, or didn't fit the needs of smaller businesses. There was a gap in the market for an affordable, user-friendly tool that could streamline operations for small to mid-sized companies. And that's when the idea for my first product, a task automation tool, was born. I knew I couldn't just stay in my corporate job forever. The more I thought about this idea, the more obsessed I became with it. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't focus. I was stuck between two worlds, my steady job that paid the bills and this new venture that could change everything. So, after much deliberation, I made the hardest decision of my life. I quit my job. With a little savings, I rented a tiny office space in a co-working building. I didn't have much, just a laptop, a few $1,000s, and a head full of ideas. But I was determined. I spent the next few months teaching myself coding. I had a basic understanding of technology from my previous job, but this was a different ballgame. I spent countless hours watching tutorials, reading articles, and experimenting with code. It was frustrating at first, but I had a goal, and that kept me going. After 6 months of sleepless nights and endless coding, I had a basic version of the automation tool ready. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. I knew I needed some feedback before moving forward, so I reached out to a few small businesses I knew from my previous job and offered them the tool for free in exchange for feedback. Some of them loved it, while others were skeptical. But that didn't discourage me. In fact, it made me more determined to improve the product. The next step was marketing. I had no budget for a big advertising campaign, so I started by building a simple website and running ads on social media. I didn't have much of a following, but I was amazed by how many small businesses were looking for a solution like mine. Slowly but surely, customers started trickling in. It wasn't a flood, but it was enough to keep me going. During this time, I met Sarah. She was a seasoned marketer who had been running her own consulting business for years. We hit it off immediately, and I told her about my product and my struggles. She saw potential in it, and after a few conversations, she agreed to join my team as the first employee. It was a turning point for me. Having Sarah on board meant I could finally focus on improving the product, while she handled the marketing side of things. As the business grew, I realized that I couldn't do everything on my own. I started hiring more people, bringing in developers, designers, and customer support staff. Each new hire was a step toward turning this small side project into a full-fledged business. There were challenges along the way, of course. Cash flow was tight, and we had to be strategic about every penny we spent. But we kept pushing forward. I'll never forget the day we launched the paid version of our product. It was a huge leap, and we were nervous. What if no one bought it? What if it failed? But when the first payment came through, I felt a surge of excitement that I'll never forget. It wasn't much, but it was proof that people valued what we were doing. It was the validation we needed to keep going. From there, things started to snowball. As our customer base grew, so did our revenue. We reinvested every penny into the business, hiring more people and expanding our marketing efforts. Within 2 years, we were a profitable company. It was still a small operation, but it was growing rapidly, and we were getting noticed. Fast forward to today, and my company has grown into a leading provider of automation tools for small businesses. We've raised a few rounds of funding, expanded our product offerings, and built a team of passionate, dedicated people. We now serve thousands of customers worldwide, and our software is used by businesses in over 20 countries. Looking back, I can't believe how far we've come. There were times when I doubted myself, when I thought I wasn't cut out for this, but I stuck with it. The key to success wasn't brilliance or luck, it was persistence. I kept learning, kept improving, and kept pushing forward, even when things seemed impossible. There were moments of frustration, of failure, but those were the moments that taught me the most. I've learned that entrepreneurship isn't just about having a great idea. It's about executing that idea, dealing with setbacks, and constantly improving. It's about building a team that shares your vision and working together toward a common goal. It's about understanding that the road will be tough, but if you stay focused and resilient, you can turn your dream into reality. If I had any advice for aspiring entrepreneurs, it would be this: don't let fear hold you back. The path won't be easy, but nothing worth having ever is. Take that leap, learn as you go, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. Your biggest successes often come after your biggest failures. Keep going, and eventually, the pieces will fall into place. And above all, remember, you're capable of so much more than you think. So here's a long-winded, but honest story of how I started my own business after realizing my 9-to-5 job was slowly draining the life out of me. It's not a rags-to-riches tale, but more like a grit and figuring it out kind of journey. Hopefully, it'll inspire someone out there who feels like they're stuck in a dead-end job or just unsure if they can really make the leap into entrepreneurship. I won't sugarcoat anything, and I hope that's okay with you. I grew up in a middle-class family, where my parents worked hard to provide for my brother and me. We didn't have much, but we had enough to get by. My dad was a blue-collar worker who put in long hours at a factory, while my mom worked part-time as a cashier at a grocery store. They both had the mindset that you work hard, keep your head down, and success will eventually follow. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. Like a lot of kids, I was told that if I wanted to have a good life, I needed to get a good job. So when I graduated high school, I followed the script. I enrolled in college, chose a business major because it felt safe and something that would give me plenty of job opportunities afterward. After graduation, I managed to land a steady job at a medium-sized marketing agency. It was an entry-level position, so I didn't expect much. The pay was decent for someone fresh out of college, but the excitement of the new job quickly wore off. At first, I thought it was just the getting your foot in the door phase, but after a couple of years, I started feeling, well, stuck. The office politics were exhausting. My boss was the type who only cared about numbers and deadlines, while the rest of us were just cogs in the machine. I could feel my soul slowly withering away every time I spent 8 hours staring at a computer screen, editing documents, creating reports, and doing all the things that didn't really excite me. What hit me the hardest was the realization that I was living a life on autopilot. Every day felt the same. I'd wake up at 7 a.m., get dressed in the same stiff button-down shirt, grab a coffee, and head to work. At the end of the day, I'd drag myself home, maybe binge-watch a series, and then repeat the whole process again the next day. I was stuck in a loop, and it made me miserable. One day, after another soul-crushing meeting where I felt like I was talking to a brick wall, I decided I couldn't keep doing this. I realized that I didn't just want to work for someone else my entire life. I didn't want to be 40 or 50, looking back and regretting not taking risks when I was younger. I wanted to build something of my own, something that could give me freedom from the toxic work culture, from endless commutes, and from the crushing realization that I was just a number on a spreadsheet. But where do you even start? I didn't have any special skills outside of marketing, and I sure as hell didn't have a ton of money to launch a business. The idea of starting a business always seemed like something only the wealthy or super connected could do, right? I mean, I didn't have any rich uncle who could fund my startup. I was just a regular guy, sitting at a cubicle, scrolling through Instagram on my lunch break, dreaming of being my own boss. I started researching. I spent nights after work, reading up on small businesses, entrepreneurship, and the various ways people could get started. I listened to podcasts, watched YouTube videos, and read books. The more I learned, the more I realized that starting a business wasn't as out of reach as I had once thought. A business didn't have to start with $1 million investment. It could begin with just an idea and the willingness to hustle. After a few months of brainstorming, I landed on an idea that seemed like it had potential. I had always been into health and fitness, even though my day job didn't allow me to pursue it as much as I would have liked. One thing I noticed was that there were a ton of workout programs and diet plans, but none of them really catered to people with full-time jobs. Everything I found was either way too extreme or too time-consuming. So, I thought, why not create a fitness program for busy professionals? Something that was flexible, effective, and didn't require hours in the gym every day. At first, the idea seemed so simple. Too simple, almost. I thought, there's no way people will pay for this. But after a few weeks of thinking it over, I realized that I could offer a unique service, online fitness coaching that could be done in the comfort of people's homes or during their lunch breaks, with no complicated equipment required. Plus, I had a background in marketing, so I figured I could at least market it well. I started small, using every free resource I could find. I set up a website using a simple template, created a few workout plans, and put together a pricing structure. I knew I wouldn't be able to quit my job right away, so I decided to launch the business on the side, working on it in the evenings and weekends. I told a few friends and family members about it, and to my surprise, people were interested. They wanted to know more about what I was offering. I didn't make a ton of money at first, but I was making something. The first few months were brutal. I had to juggle my full-time job and my side hustle, which meant working late into the night and skipping out on social events. But little by little, I started to gain a small following. Word of mouth helped, and I was able to get a few paying clients. After about 6 months, I had enough clients that I could start seeing some real income from the business. I had saved up enough money to feel somewhat secure about the transition, so I quit my job. It was terrifying, leaving behind the stability of a steady paycheck to go full-time into a business that was still growing. But I had made a promise to myself. I was going to give it everything I had and see where it went. Fast forward 2 years, and I'm running a full-fledged fitness coaching business. I've got a team of part-time coaches who help me manage the growing client base, and we've expanded our services to include group training and nutrition coaching. The best part? I finally have the flexibility I craved. I can work from anywhere, I set my own hours, and I'm doing something that I'm genuinely passionate about. I still have days where I wonder if I made the right choice. There's a lot of uncertainty in entrepreneurship, and the pressure can be overwhelming at times. But every time I wake up excited to get to work, I know I'm on the right path. It's been tough, but it's also been the most rewarding decision I've ever made. If you're feeling stuck, wondering if you can make it as an entrepreneur, just know this. It won't be easy, but it will be worth it. Thanks for reading. If anyone wants to chat about starting a business, I'm always down to share advice. I'm living proof that you don't need to be a millionaire to start something big. You just need the guts to go for it. I'm an entrepreneur, and the road to building my business wasn't just a long journey. It was an emotional roller coaster with more lows than highs. My story starts in a small town where everyone knows everyone, and life seems relatively simple. But for me, it was never simple. Growing up, I wasn't the stereotypical future entrepreneur. I was shy, introverted, and spent more time reading than making friends. I wasn't interested in the same things that everyone else was. While my friends played video games or hung out at the local diner, I spent my evenings reading books about business, tech, and how people built empires. I wasn't sure what it meant to be an entrepreneur, but I knew I wanted something more than what my small town could offer. I graduated high school with mediocre grades and little to no direction. My parents, both working-class folks, didn't understand my desire for something beyond the status quo. My mom wanted me to take over her beauty salon, and my dad thought I should follow in his footsteps and work at the local car repair shop. But deep down, I knew that wasn't for me. I wanted to create something that would allow me to break free from the limitations of my environment. I enrolled in college with the vague idea of pursuing something related to business or technology. I wasn't sure what path I wanted to take, but I knew I didn't want to work a typical 9-to-5 job. During my sophomore year, I got my first taste of what it meant to start something from scratch. A friend of mine, who had some experience with website design, suggested we create a platform to help local businesses market themselves online. It was 2012, and the digital world was still in its infancy, especially for small businesses. We spent hours learning how to code, build websites, and pitch to local businesses. I remember going door to door in my town, pitching this idea to every small business owner I could find. The idea was simple. We wanted to offer affordable websites to businesses that didn't know how to establish an online presence. But, unsurprisingly, no one was interested. I would walk out of these meetings feeling deflated, wondering if I was wasting my time. After months of rejection, we finally landed our first client, a small mom-and-pop cafe. They were hesitant, but they saw value in what we offered. That first project was both exhilarating and terrifying. We built the website, marketed it, and within weeks, the cafe started to see an increase in foot traffic. It wasn't a massive increase, but it was enough to prove that our idea had potential. I remember feeling so proud, but also incredibly overwhelmed. This wasn't something I could do on my own, but I didn't have the resources to hire anyone. That experience taught me two valuable lessons. First, that persistence pays off, and second, that running a business wasn't just about having a good idea, it was about execution. I kept working on small projects like this, learning as I went, and refining my skills. Eventually, I dropped out of college to focus on my business full-time. It wasn't an easy decision. My parents were disappointed, and my friends thought I was crazy. But I was certain that this was the path I wanted to take. The early days of full-time entrepreneurship were rough. I worked 12-hour days, often 7 days a week. I had no real guidance, no mentors, and no clear roadmap. There were weeks where I had to scrape together enough money to pay my rent, let alone invest in growing the business. I also faced constant self-doubt. Was I even good enough to run a business? Was I doing the right thing? But every small win, whether it was a new client or a positive review, kept me going. In 2014, I hit a turning point. A large local business reached out to us, asking if we could help them with a complete website overhaul. This was the big break I had been waiting for. The project was massive, and it required a team of designers, developers, and marketers. I was in over my head, but I couldn't pass up the opportunity. I started networking aggressively, hiring a team of freelancers to help with the work. I remember being so scared that we wouldn't deliver, but somehow, we did. The project was a success, and it led to more high-profile clients. At this point, I realized that my small local business was starting to grow. But with growth came new challenges. I was no longer just handling the day-to-day tasks. I had to think about strategy, operations, and scaling. I quickly learned that running a business wasn't just about making money. It was about managing people, processes, and expectations. I had to find a way to balance everything, and for the first time, I felt like I was drowning. I hired more employees, brought on a few key partners, and made a concerted effort to systematize our processes. We built a sales funnel, automated parts of our work, and started tracking data more meticulously. By 2016, our company had become profitable, and I started to feel like we were on the right path. But even then, I was constantly battling imposter syndrome. Every time we landed a big client, I couldn't help but wonder when someone would realize I didn't really know what I was doing. Then came the crash. In 2017, our biggest client, an e-commerce company, pulled out unexpectedly. It was a massive blow. We had invested so much time and money into this account that losing it felt like the end of the world. The revenue loss was devastating, and I was forced to let go of several employees. I remember feeling ashamed of the failure, like I had let everyone down. I was back at square one, unsure of what to do next. But I didn't give up. I went back to the basics. I focused on the clients we still had and worked tirelessly to rebuild our reputation. I also started diversifying our services, moving beyond just website design and offering digital marketing, SEO, and content creation. Slowly but surely, we regained our footing. By 2019, the business was thriving again, and this time, we were more diverse and resilient. Looking back now, I can say with certainty that entrepreneurship isn't just about money or success, it's about the journey. It's about constantly evolving, learning, and pushing through the tough times. If you're thinking about starting a business, know that it's not going to be easy. You're going to fail more times than you succeed, and you're going to doubt yourself constantly. But the key is to keep going. And when you do finally reach success, you'll realize that the struggles along the way are what made the journey worth it. My business continues to grow, and I'm now in the process of scaling it to new heights. I've learned a lot over the years, and while the road has been filled with setbacks and obstacles, I wouldn't trade the experience for anything. If you're an entrepreneur, keep grinding. Your success won't come easily, but if you keep going, One day you'll look back and realize that all the struggles were just stepping stones towards something greater. I was always the kid who hustled. As a teenager, I'd run errands for neighbors, walk dogs, and sell anything I could get my hands on. I wasn't interested in the traditional get a job, get a paycheck routine. My mindset was simple: find a need, fill it, and make money. I never expected that the skills I was picking up in high school would someday lead me to become the CEO of a six-figure startup. It all started with a broken skateboard. I remember I was about 16, and I had this old board that had seen better days. The wheels were cracked, the deck had chips, and the grip tape was barely hanging on. But instead of just tossing it out, I thought, why not try to fix it? So, I got to work. I scavenged the internet for parts, ordered some new wheels and grip tape, and spent a couple of weekends putting it all back together. To my surprise, not only did the board work fine, it actually felt better than when it was new. I was proud of my work, but something even more interesting happened. A buddy of mine saw me working on the board and asked if I could fix his too. Then another friend asked if I could help him build a custom skateboard. Eventually, word spread around school, and I was the go-to guy for skateboard repairs and custom builds. At first, I wasn't making much. A few bucks here and there. But it felt like I was onto something. I wasn't just fixing boards, I was providing a service people wanted. And it was fun. Soon, I started getting more customers, some who were willing to pay for custom designs or upgrades on their boards. I knew I couldn't keep doing it out of my garage forever, so I took the leap and turned it into a side hustle. I started taking my work more seriously. I created a brand, Street Fix, and set up a simple website. I offered repairs, customizations, and even started selling high-quality boards and parts from suppliers. Things were picking up, but the real turning point came when I started using social media. Instagram was huge for skaters, and I quickly realized that posting before and after photos of the boards I worked on could attract a lot of attention. I began to post regularly, showing off the unique designs and customizations I was doing. That's when things exploded. I'll never forget the first big order I got. A local skate shop reached out to me asking if I could provide them with custom boards for their store. They loved the designs I was showcasing on Instagram and wanted to offer something different from what other shops carried. I was ecstatic. I had been working from my garage for years, and now a store wanted to stock my product. It was a small, local shop, but it was a huge step for me. I knew I needed to scale quickly if I was going to keep up with demand. At that point, I was balancing school with the business, and honestly, it was overwhelming. I spent late nights working on boards, shipping orders, and managing my social media. But I kept pushing forward because I could feel it. I was onto something big. I knew I had to take risks, and I wasn't afraid of working long hours. But scaling wasn't easy. I needed capital to expand my operation, so I started looking for investors. I didn't have a lot of connections, but I managed to get an introduction to an angel investor through a family friend. The meeting was nerve-wracking. I was just a 17-year-old kid pitching my idea, but I had one thing going for me: passion. I was excited about what I was doing, and that excitement was contagious. After a couple of follow-up meetings, I secured a $25,000 investment. With that capital, I was able to move out of my garage and rent a small warehouse. I hired a few employees to help with the growing workload, including my best friend, who was great with design and marketing. I also invested in better equipment to increase production efficiency. With more time and resources at my disposal, I started to focus on the bigger picture: branding, customer experience, and building a solid business model. That's when I realized I needed to separate myself from the day-to-day operations to really scale the business. I brought in a manager who could handle operations while I focused on marketing and expanding the brand. I also worked hard to secure more wholesale deals with skate shops across the country. It wasn't easy, and it took a lot of rejection and follow-up, but eventually, I landed contracts with some bigger retailers. Fast forward a couple of years, and Street Fix had grown into a thriving business. We were selling custom skateboards, providing repairs, and offering high-end skateboard parts. We were getting press coverage, and our Instagram account had over 100,000 followers. My team had grown to about 20 employees, and I was finally able to pay myself a decent salary. I had moved out of my parents' house, and I even bought my first car with the profits from the business. But the journey wasn't without its challenges. There were plenty of times when I felt like giving up. Like the time we hit a cash flow issue and almost couldn't make payroll. Or when one of our biggest suppliers went out of business, and I had to scramble to find new sources. There were moments when I questioned whether I was cut out for this, But I always reminded myself of why I started: to make something out of nothing, to build something that I could be proud of. In 2020, the pandemic hit, and that was another major test for the business. Skateboarding was one of the few outdoor activities people could still enjoy, so we saw an initial surge in sales. But as the economy faltered, we also faced some tough months. We had to adapt quickly, offering virtual skate lessons, selling DIY skateboard kits, and pivoting our marketing strategy to focus on the growing trend of people turning to hobbies during lockdowns. Today, StreetFix is a six-figure business. We've expanded our product line to include accessories, apparel, and even limited edition skateboards. We've got a loyal customer base and are constantly innovating. And I'm still just as passionate about skateboarding as I was when I started. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. It all started with a broken skateboard and a little bit of hustle. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that persistence pays off. Don't be afraid to take risks, put in the work, and pursue what you're passionate about. Success doesn't happen overnight, but with the right mindset and a lot of grit, it's possible. Hey, friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. I've always been one of those people who believed that the road to success wasn't paved with big, glamorous opportunities. It wasn't about winning a golden ticket or being at the right place at the right time, but rather about consistency, mistakes, and turning failures into learning moments. My journey began with a simple idea. I wanted to build something that could change my life. As a kid, I always dreamed of running my own business. The thing is, I didn't have any fancy connections, tons of capital, or a magical mentor. What I did have was a burning desire to create and make something out of nothing. After college, I found myself in a small 9-to-5 job. The kind where you do your work, get paid, and go home, without any real passion for what you were doing. I quickly realized that this life was not for me. I spent most of my time thinking about what I could be doing differently, what I could be building, and how I could escape the monotony. I started researching and reading about successful entrepreneurs, some of whom had started with nothing but a good idea and a relentless drive. One day, while working late, I had a moment of clarity. I had always been obsessed with tech and gadgets, specifically smartphones. I started thinking about how people were always looking for the next great accessory to enhance their phones. There were so many cool, niche products that were never available in mainstream stores. What if I could make those products accessible to a wider audience? I immediately thought, why not start an online store that specializes in high-quality, unique phone accessories? That night, I stayed up for hours sketching out the business plan on my laptop. I researched everything from suppliers to potential marketing strategies. It felt like an impossible task, but the excitement I felt made the challenge feel surmountable. I had no idea what I was doing. I knew how to use a smartphone, but not how to run a store. I had no inventory, no website, and no clue how to actually market to customers. I decided to take a leap of faith. I created a Shopify store, choosing a simple template and uploading a few products I found through suppliers I contacted. I used my savings to buy a small amount of inventory, all the while hoping and praying that this investment would somehow pay off. I knew that the first few months were going to be difficult. My store launched, and the first few weeks were quiet. It was disheartening at first, but I wasn't ready to give up. I spent hours on forums, watching YouTube tutorials, and taking free online courses. Slowly but surely, I learned the ropes of digital marketing. I began running ads on Facebook and Instagram. At first, I spent too much on ads with little to no return, but I didn't stop. I refined my strategy, focused on the right target audience, and found ways to optimize my ads. Eventually, the sales started rolling in, not in massive waves, but steady enough to keep me motivated. There was a point where I almost gave up. I'd burned through a lot of savings, and the revenue I was generating didn't even come close to covering the expenses. There were days when I felt like everything was falling apart. The stress of trying to juggle the business with my day job, maintaining relationships, and dealing with self-doubt was exhausting. I remember sitting at my desk late one night, staring at the sales data. I was barely breaking even. It felt like I was spinning my wheels. But then, something shifted. I had a conversation with a customer who had reached out about a product issue. It wasn't a complaint, just a simple question. But the way I handled the situation, giving them a quick, thoughtful response and offering a discount, led to them buying more from my store. I realized that customer service was just as important as the product itself. I started focusing on providing exceptional service, responding promptly, and engaging with my customers in a way that made them feel valued. Soon, the customer base began to grow. Word of mouth worked wonders, and positive reviews started flooding in. I made it a point to always over-deliver. If there was a problem with an order, I fixed it without hesitation. If a customer had a question about a product, I gave them an honest, in-depth answer, even if it wasn't always in my best interest. Over time, my small store became known for its great service and unique products. I was no longer just another e-commerce store. I was a business people trusted. But that didn't mean the work was done. Far from it. I had to learn how to scale. By this point, I've been working tirelessly for over a year, doing everything myself: product sourcing, customer service, social media management, ads, and even packing orders. I realized that if I wanted to take the business to the next level, I needed help. But hiring people was a big leap for me. I had no idea how to interview or what kind of team I needed to build. My first hire was a part-time virtual assistant to help with customer service. This was one of the best decisions I ever made. Having someone else handle the repetitive tasks gave me more time to focus on growing the business. Over time, I hired a small team, a graphic designer to revamp the website, a content creator to handle social media, and later, a fulfillment team to take over packaging and shipping. Scaling wasn't easy. It came with its own set of challenges, like managing cash flow and ensuring that the quality of service didn't slip. But I was no longer working alone, and the business was expanding faster than I had ever imagined. Today, I look back on that first year with a sense of pride. What started as a tiny online store with a limited product selection is now a thriving business with a full product catalog and thousands of customers across the globe. I still have my ups and downs, but the business has been growing steadily, and I've learned so much along the way. In the end, I've come to realize that entrepreneurship isn't about finding that one big break or making a perfect decision every time. It's about persistence, adaptability, and learning from your failures. It's about being willing to make mistakes, adjust, and keep moving forward, even when the path ahead is uncertain. If I'd quit when things got tough, I wouldn't be where I am today. If you're thinking about starting a business, just know this: it's not easy. It's a grind. There will be nights when you doubt yourself and days when things go wrong. But if you're willing to put in the work, be patient, and learn from your mistakes, success can come. And when it does, the reward isn't just financial, it's the satisfaction of building something that's entirely yours. So here's my advice: just start. Don't wait for the perfect moment or the ideal conditions. Take the first step, learn as you go, and trust the process. You never know where it might take you. This is the story of how I went from working a 9-to-5 job I hated to building a multi-six-figure business. It's not an overnight success story, but it's one of perseverance, taking risks, and learning a lot along the way. I'm hoping it can inspire someone who's on the fence about starting their own journey. For context, I was a marketing manager at a mid-sized tech company, and like many people, I felt stuck. I had good benefits, a stable salary, and an office with a decent view. But every day I felt like I was just going through the motions. I'd clock in at 9 a.m., hit the same marketing targets, attend pointless meetings, and leave at 6 p.m. to do it all over again. I knew something had to change, but I had no idea where to begin. Then, the idea for my business came to me almost by accident. It started with a conversation I had with a friend about an idea I'd been mulling over for years: creating a product that would simplify digital marketing for small businesses. As a marketing professional, I'd seen how tough it was for small business owners to keep up with digital trends, but I also realized that many of the tools out there were either too expensive or overly complicated. That's when it clicked. Why not build a tool that was simple, effective, and affordable? It felt like the right time, and I had the knowledge, but there was one big hurdle. I had zero technical skills. I wasn't a developer, I wasn't a designer, and I didn't even have a network of people who could help me build the product. But I had something more important: determination. I started researching everything I could about how to build a SaaS product. I took online courses, read books, watched YouTube videos, and spent hours on Reddit learning from people who had built products before. Slowly, the pieces started to come together. I didn't want to quit my job right away because I knew how risky it was to jump into the unknown, so I started working on my idea in my spare time. I'd wake up at 5 a.m., work on the product for an hour before heading to the office, then spend my lunch breaks and evenings doing the same. It was exhausting, but I was driven. Every time I hit a roadblock, I would take a deep breath, find a solution, and keep pushing forward. Eventually, after about 6 months of working on the side, I had a working prototype. It wasn't pretty, and it definitely wasn't perfect, but it was functional. At that point, I started looking for people to test it. I reached out to small business owners I knew, offering them free trials in exchange for feedback. I still remember the first time a business owner told me they loved the product. It wasn't much, just a simple comment in an email, but it felt like validation. I knew I had something, but there was still a huge gap between where I was and where I needed to be. I needed capital. I didn't have the money to hire developers or pay for marketing campaigns, so I turned to crowdfunding. I spent weeks putting together a pitch for Kickstarter, poring over every detail, and shooting a video to explain the product. I launched it with no real expectation, just hoping to raise enough money to get the product off the ground. The first 24 hours were terrifying. I didn't raise a single dollar. It felt like a complete failure. But I didn't give up. I tweaked my pitch, posted it on every social media platform, emailed friends and family, and reached out to influencers who might be willing to help. Slowly, the backers started to roll in. By the end of the month, I had raised over $50,000. It wasn't a huge sum in the grand scheme of things, but it was enough to get started. With the money raised, I was able to hire a small team of developers. We worked around the clock to improve the product. We redesigned the user interface, fixed bugs, and added features based on customer feedback. After 6 months of sleepless nights, we launched the first version of the product to paying customers. The early days of sales were slow. I didn't have a big marketing budget, so I relied heavily on word of mouth and social media to drive traffic. It was a grind, but we got some traction, and I started to learn how to market the product more effectively. We started doing webinars, offering more value in our content, and experimenting with different pricing models. Slowly but surely, the customer base grew. As the company started to grow, I knew I needed to make some tough decisions. I was still working my 9-to-5 job while managing the business on the side, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to balance both. I had to ask myself, do I take the leap and go full-time into the business? The fear of failing was overwhelming, but I also knew that if I didn't take the risk, I'd never know if it could succeed. One night, I stayed up late thinking about everything I'd built so far. I had a small, but loyal customer base, a product that people actually wanted, and the potential for growth. I realized that staying in my job was holding me back. So, with some trepidation, I put in my 2 weeks' notice. Leaving my job was both thrilling and terrifying. The first few months of running the business full-time were chaotic. There were days when I questioned my decision, but I kept moving forward. I brought on a few more people to help with sales and marketing, and we started scaling. We went from a few hundred customers to a few thousand. The growth was steady but overwhelming. The biggest lesson I've learned throughout this journey is the importance of resilience. There were countless moments where things went wrong, servers crashing, negative reviews, clients who demanded more than we could deliver. But through it all, I kept going. I surrounded myself with people who believed in the vision, and we kept improving the product and the customer experience. Now, looking back, I can honestly say that taking the leap and building my own business was one of the best decisions I've ever made. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen quickly, but the rewards have been worth it. Today, we're a multi-six-figure business, and I have the freedom to do what I love every day. So if you're sitting there on the fence, wondering if you should start your own business, let me tell you this: go for it. It's not easy, and it's not instant, but if you stick with it, the rewards can be life-changing. But you have to be willing to put in the work, learn from your mistakes, and keep pushing forward, even when it feels like you're failing. You never know how far you can go unless you take that first step. So, I guess I should start by saying this all began out of necessity, not a burning desire to be an entrepreneur. It wasn't like I woke up one day, read a self-help book, and decided I was going to be the next Elon Musk. No, this started as a side hustle that quickly grew into something much bigger than I ever imagined. It was about 5 years ago when I found myself in a dead-end job, working 50 hours a week as a marketing assistant at a mid-level tech company. I wasn't exactly miserable, but it wasn't exactly fulfilling either. I had this overwhelming sense that I wasn't living up to my potential, but I didn't know what to do about it. I spent my free time reading about business strategies, watching TED Talks, and dabbling in side projects, but nothing felt right. Then one day, I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through social media, when I saw a post about a guy who was making money selling personalized t-shirts. Now, I had zero experience in fashion, design, or even graphic arts, but something about it clicked. I thought, why can't I do that? I'm creative. I'm good at marketing. I could figure this out. At that point, I didn't have a lot of money to throw around. I had about $500 saved up, which was the result of months of not spending much, cutting down on unnecessary purchases, and a bonus from work that I had put aside. I decided to take the plunge. I used that money to buy a basic heat press, some blank t-shirts, and a subscription to a design software program. No fancy equipment or anything crazy, just the essentials to get started. The first few weeks were rough. I spent hours designing graphics, trying to make them look professional, but they were amateur at best. I made mistakes left and right, with colors not printing properly or designs being too large or too small. I had no clue about sourcing materials, so I'd get the cheapest shirts possible, which ended up being low quality. My first set of t-shirts looked horrible, but I wasn't discouraged. I knew that the only way to get better was to keep trying. Once I had a handful of designs I was semi-proud of, I set up an online store. I used Shopify because it was easy to set up and affordable. My first sale didn't come for a couple of weeks, and I won't lie, it was disheartening. I was reading all these success stories about people quitting their jobs and making six figures, while I was just trying to figure out how to break even. But then something shifted. One day, I posted a picture of one of my shirts on Instagram, and someone shared it on their story. That one share led to a small handful of people checking out my store. A couple of people made purchases. Then another person shared my post, and the next thing I knew, I was starting to get a little traction. It wasn't much, but it was something. And that something kept me going. From there, I decided to focus on what I could control, my marketing. I was already working in marketing, so I applied everything I knew about SEO, paid ads, and social media campaigns to my own business. I began experimenting with Instagram and Facebook ads, honing in on my target audience, and tweaking my campaigns until I started seeing results. The turning point came when I decided to create a limited edition collection of shirts based on a popular meme that was trending at the time. I jumped on the bandwagon, but in a way that felt authentic to my brand. I didn't try to force it, I just made something fun and relevant. That collection sold out in a few days. I couldn't believe it. It wasn't enough to retire or quit my job, but it proved that there was potential. As the months went by, I kept reinvesting everything I made back into the business. I upgraded my equipment, hired a freelance graphic designer to help with designs, and began experimenting with different types of merchandise. Eventually, I found a reliable supplier for higher quality shirts and hoodies. Slowly but surely, my business started to feel like an actual company rather than a small side hustle. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were plenty of setbacks along the way. I had multiple issues with suppliers not delivering on time, and at one point, my website was hacked, which cost me days of sales and a lot of frustration. I remember one night, after a major tech issue with the store, I was ready to quit. I didn't have the energy for all the troubleshooting, customer complaints, and sleepless nights anymore. I questioned whether it was worth it. But every time I thought about throwing in the towel, I'd get a message from a customer who loved their shirt or received a kind email from someone who supported what I was doing. Those small wins were what kept me going, even when it felt like everything else was falling apart. As the business grew, I started to bring in help. I hired a part-time assistant to handle customer service and a couple of designers to keep up with demand. It was a bit scary to give up control, but I quickly realized that if I wanted to scale, I couldn't do everything myself. Letting go of certain tasks allowed me to focus on the bigger picture: marketing, customer acquisition, and product development. Fast forward to today, and I'm proud to say that my business is making a solid six-figure income. I've been able to quit my full-time job and focus solely on the business, and I'm even thinking about expanding into other product lines like bags and hats. What started as a simple idea to sell t-shirts has evolved into something far greater than I ever expected. But even though things have gotten better, the journey has been far from easy. There are still challenges to face, new trends to navigate, and competition to worry about. There are days when I still feel overwhelmed by everything that comes with running a business. But now, I can look back and see how far I've come, and that makes the hard days a little easier to bear. So, if there's one piece of advice I could give to anyone thinking about starting their own business, it would be this: don't wait for the perfect moment. It won't ever come. Start small, focus on the basics, and keep pushing forward. You won't have all the answers at first, but the key is to keep learning and adapting. In the end, it's all about persistence and willingness to embrace failure as a stepping stone to success. Who knows? Your side hustle might just turn into something amazing too. This is a story about how I turned my small side hustle into a full-fledged business that now supports my family. It wasn't an easy journey, and there were countless moments where I thought about quitting. But looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. This is a story of grit, persistence, and the power of taking risks. To start, I've always been the type to have side projects. I've worked in corporate jobs for most of my career, but I was never one to just sit back and take things at face value. I wanted more. More freedom, more challenges, and most of all, more control over my time. So, a few years ago, I decided to start a small e-commerce business. It wasn't some grand plan that I meticulously crafted over months. In fact, it was more of an accidental venture than anything else. I had noticed a gap in the market for personalized phone accessories. I wasn't the only one selling phone cases online, but I saw an opportunity to take it up a notch. Instead of just selling plain cases, I would offer custom designs, something people could personalize with their names, favorite quotes, or photos. At the time, I was working a 9-to-5 job and thought it would be a fun side gig to make some extra cash. I started small, setting up an online store using Shopify, and began designing custom phone cases. I invested about $200 into the business for initial materials and setup. I used my free time after work to design the cases, market the products on social media, and fulfill orders. Honestly, I didn't expect much. I thought it would just be a way to keep me busy and maybe bring in an extra $200 a month. The first month, I sold a total of 5 cases. The second month, it jumped to 15. By the third month, I was getting a steady flow of orders, and I realized I had something here. The most important lesson I learned in those early months was that I wasn't going to make a lot of money if I didn't put myself out there more. Social media was my best friend. I spent hours learning how to effectively use Instagram and Facebook to showcase my products. I reached out to influencers, sent free samples in exchange for honest reviews, and got my friends to post about the business. It was exhausting, but it paid off. Around the 6-month mark, my business had grown to the point where I was making around $2,000 a month in profit. For me, this was a game changer. I realized I could make this side hustle into something more substantial, but I wasn't quite ready to quit my job just yet. The transition wasn't easy, though. I had to find ways to balance my full-time job with the business. There were nights I would stay up until 2 a.m. designing new products or responding to customer inquiries. Weekends were spent packing orders and making sure everything ran smoothly. But as the months went by, the business grew. My sales doubled, then tripled. By the end of the first year, I was making about $7,000 a month in profit. At this point, I knew I had to make a decision. I had reached a crossroads in my life. Do I keep working my corporate job, or do I go all in on the business? It was a terrifying thought. The stability of a 9-to-5 job is something a lot of people take for granted. There's a comfort in knowing you'll have a paycheck every 2 weeks, even if it's not your dream job. But the idea of growing my business and having the freedom to create my own schedule was too appealing. So, I took the plunge. I left my corporate job and went full-time with my e-commerce business. The first few months of being a full-time entrepreneur were rough. It wasn't as glamorous as I had imagined. There were no more weekly paychecks, and every month I had to hustle harder to make sure the business stayed afloat. The stress was immense. I had to figure out how to scale my operations. I started outsourcing some tasks, like design and customer service, to free up my time to focus on marketing and expanding the product line. But as the business grew, I also started to make smarter decisions. I reinvested the profits back into the business, buying better equipment and hiring a small team to help me handle the logistics. I also began to experiment with paid advertising, which had a huge impact on my sales. I had learned over the past year that relying solely on organic social media growth wasn't enough. I needed to spend money to make money, and that was a tough pill to swallow. After about a year of full-time entrepreneurship, the business hit $15,000 a month in profit. That was a milestone for me. I couldn't believe I had gone from making just a few $100s a month to supporting my entire family with my business. It wasn't always easy, and there were times when I doubted myself, but looking back, I see that all the late nights and sacrifices paid off. Now, after 3 years of running the business full-time, I've scaled it even further. I have a full team working with me, including a marketing director, designers, and customer support staff. We've expanded into other product categories, and I'm now making well over $50,000 a month in profit. What started as a simple side hustle has turned into a thriving business that provides for my family and gives me the freedom I always wanted. But beyond the financial success, the biggest reward has been the personal growth. I've learned so much about business, marketing, and what it takes to build something from the ground up. I've faced countless setbacks and challenges, but I've also learned how to push through them and keep going. If I could give any advice to someone thinking about starting their own business, it would be this: don't wait for the perfect moment to start. There will never be a perfect moment. Just take that first step and then keep taking more. Be prepared to fail, but also be prepared to learn from those failures. Success isn't an overnight thing. It's a result of years of persistence and hard work. And when you're feeling like giving up, remember that the best thing you can do is keep going. This journey wasn't easy, but I wouldn't change a thing. I'm proud of what I've built, and I'm excited for what's next. If I can do it, anyone can. So, if you're thinking about taking the leap, just go for it. You never know where it might take you. I started my entrepreneurial journey with nothing but a laptop, a dream, and the belief that I could somehow make it in this crazy world of business. Looking back, it feels like the most unlikely of paths, but somehow, through sheer grit and a bit of luck, I managed to turn that tiny spark of hope into something real. It all began about 5 years ago. I was in my early 20s, fresh out of college, and clueless about what to do next. I had no job offers, no concrete career plans, and honestly, I didn't even know what I wanted to do with my life. I didn't come from a family of entrepreneurs, and I certainly didn't have a rich uncle or any connections to speak of. I wasn't the smartest person in my class, nor the most gifted, but I had one thing going for me: an unwavering curiosity and a passion for learning. I had always been interested in tech and the internet. I spent most of my free time browsing through Reddit, reading about the latest startups, tech trends, and success stories. I would stay up late at night watching YouTube videos on how to start a business, listening to podcasts about entrepreneurs who had turned their ideas into multi-million-dollar companies. The more I learned, the more I realized that the barrier to entry for starting a business was lower than I had thought. All you needed was an idea, some hustle, and the willingness to fail. That's when I came up with my first business idea. I had always been good at graphic design, and I noticed that many small businesses were struggling to create professional-looking branding without spending a fortune. I thought, what if I could offer affordable, high-quality design services to startups and small businesses? It seemed like a perfect niche. There were plenty of graphic designers out there, but not many targeting the small business market with a budget-friendly, personalized service. I immediately went to work, building a simple website, creating a few sample designs, and reaching out to anyone I knew who might need design help. It was the typical start-from-scratch story. No clients, no reputation, just me hustling and sending cold emails to local businesses. For the first few months, I didn't get a single response. I had no social proof, no portfolio, and honestly, no credibility. I was terrified, but I kept pushing forward. I spent my days reaching out to leads, learning more about design trends, and refining my craft. Slowly but surely, a few clients started to come through. At first, they were small projects, but they gave me the momentum I needed to keep going. I remember the first client who paid me more than $100 for a design. It was a logo for a local bakery, and I was over the moon. That $100 felt like $1,000,000 because it validated the idea that I could actually make money doing something I loved. I poured my heart and soul into every project, making sure to over-deliver, hoping that these clients would refer me to others. The first big breakthrough came when a client I had worked with on a small logo project recommended me to a startup looking for a full branding package. The startup was in the tech space, and their budget was much higher than anything I had worked with before. This project was a game changer. It gave me the confidence to raise my rates, invest more time into growing my business, and actually start treating it like a real company. With more clients came more work. As I started to get busier, I realized I couldn't do everything myself. I needed help, but hiring people was a huge leap for me. I didn't have the funds for full-time employees, so I started by outsourcing to freelancers. I would handle the client communication and the overall design direction, while the freelancers would help with the execution. This allowed me to take on bigger projects without sacrificing quality or my time. As the business grew, I faced new challenges. Managing a team, handling finances, negotiating with clients, These were things I hadn't anticipated. I had to learn quickly. I read books, watched countless YouTube videos, and sought advice from mentors who had been through the grind. I learned about the importance of setting clear boundaries with clients, how to price my services effectively, and the value of investing in marketing. One of the biggest challenges was dealing with rejection. Not every client was happy with the work I did, and not every project went smoothly. I had clients who ghosted me after I completed their work, others who asked for multiple revisions beyond the scope of the project, and a few who refused to pay. It was tough, but I learned that rejection wasn't the end. It was just part of the process. I had to keep learning from every failure and use it to fuel my growth. A year into running my design business, I took a leap of faith. I decided to scale my company. I hired a full-time assistant to help with administrative tasks, freeing up more of my time to focus on the creative side. I also invested in paid advertising, targeting local businesses and startups. I expanded my services to include website design and digital marketing, which were natural extensions of my skills. By the end of year 2, my company was generating enough revenue to support me full-time. I moved into a small office space, hired more employees, and built a solid team of designers and marketers. We had regular clients, and I had built a reputation in my niche. My business was no longer just a side hustle. It was a real, thriving company. But success didn't come without its ups and downs. There were times when I thought about giving up, especially during the slow months when cash flow was tight, or when clients were difficult to work with. But every time I faced a setback, I reminded myself of why I started in the first place. I wasn't doing this just for the money. I was doing it because I loved the work and I believed in the value I could provide to other businesses. Eventually, my design company became profitable enough to invest in my next venture. I launched an online course teaching aspiring designers how to build their own businesses. It was a natural extension of my journey, sharing the knowledge I had accumulated over the years with others who were just starting out. The course gained traction quickly, and soon I was helping people from all over the world learn how to turn their creative passions into businesses. Looking back, I still can't believe how far I've come. From a guy sitting in his bedroom, sending cold emails to businesses, to running a multifaceted design and education company, it feels surreal. The journey wasn't easy, but it was worth every late night and every setback. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that success isn't about having the perfect idea or the most resources. It's about persistence, adaptability, and never giving up, no matter how tough things get. So to anyone out there who's thinking about starting their own business, I say this: do it. Start with whatever you have, wherever you are. It won't be easy, and it might take longer than you expect, but if you keep pushing forward, the rewards will come. You won't regret it. I started my entrepreneurial journey in the most unexpected way. At 28, I had a stable job in finance, working for a big firm in New York City. I had a steady paycheck, health insurance, and a promising future. But there was something inside me that was unfulfilled, something telling me that I was meant for more than just sitting behind a desk, crunching numbers all day. So, in a moment of impulse, I quit my job, packed up my apartment, and moved to the West Coast to start a company. I had no clear plan, just a burning desire to build something of my own. I didn't know it at the time, but that impulsive decision would change my life forever. I started with zero experience in entrepreneurship. I had no network, no mentor, and no clear idea of how to actually run a business. All I had was an idea born out of personal frustration and a love for travel. I had been spending most of my vacations traveling to different countries, and I was constantly annoyed by how hard it was to find reliable and affordable accommodation, especially when I was in remote areas or off-the-beaten-path destinations. The idea seemed simple enough: create an app that helps travelers find unique, affordable accommodations. But even though the concept was straightforward, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I thought that all I needed was a great idea and a few good friends to help me out. But that's far from what it takes to build a business. At first, I started researching the app development process, and it quickly became clear that I had no idea how to build an app. So, I hired a developer and threw together a basic prototype. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. I also started reaching out to small property owners, people who had cabins, cottages, and guest houses, to see if they would list their properties on my platform. At the time, I had no marketing experience, and the responses were lukewarm at best. I didn't know what I was doing, but I kept pushing forward. I spent nights and weekends working on the app, learning everything I could about coding, design, and user experience. I started to see the app take shape, but I also saw the challenges that came with trying to get people to use it. After months of hard work, I finally launched the beta version of the app. I thought it would be an overnight success, but it wasn't. In fact, it was a disaster. The app crashed constantly, users complained about the interface, and I had trouble getting anyone to actually sign up. I was discouraged, but I refused to give up. I started reaching out to people in the travel industry to get feedback. I learned that what I had created wasn't a product people actually wanted. Sure, they liked the idea of it, but the execution was far from where it needed to be. That's when I decided to take a step back and reassess everything. I realized that I had been so focused on the product that I hadn't been paying enough attention to the market. I wasn't listening to my customers. So, I spent the next few months conducting interviews with travelers, property owners, and people who worked in the travel industry. I took every piece of feedback seriously, and I iterated on the app based on what I learned. Slowly but surely, the app started to improve. We fixed the bugs, redesigned the user interface, and introduced new features that people actually wanted. It wasn't an overnight success, but the app began to gain traction. We started to get positive reviews, and our user base began to grow. I remember the first time we got our first 100 users. I was over the moon. It was a small number, but it felt like a huge accomplishment at the time. The next big milestone came when I managed to get a small group of investors on board. I didn't have much to offer, but I had passion, drive, and a working product. They took a chance on me, and with their investment, I was able to hire a small team to help scale the business. As the team grew, so did the challenges. Managing a team was something I had never done before. I quickly learned that being a CEO was about far more than just having a vision. It was about setting clear expectations, building a strong company culture, and finding the right people for the right roles. I also realized how important it was to stay grounded and connected to the product. I made sure to speak to users regularly, even if it was just a quick chat with someone on the app. I wanted to stay as close to the ground as possible, even as the business started to grow. Over the next few years, we expanded our user base, improved the platform, and started to attract larger investors. We also started to look for ways to diversify our revenue streams, which led to the creation of new features like travel guides, customizable itineraries, and partnerships with local businesses. By year 3, we had reached a point where we were starting to generate real revenue. But with success came new challenges. The competition in the travel tech space was fierce, and we were facing new players who were quickly catching up to our platform. I realized that in order to stay ahead, we needed to innovate faster and be more agile than ever before. It was during this time that I had a personal epiphany. I had been so focused on growth and expansion that I had neglected the quality of the product. I had been chasing the next big feature or the next funding round, but I had lost sight of what made our platform unique in the first place. So, I made the decision to scale back and focus on improving the core product. We cut down on some of the new features that were draining our resources and instead doubled down on improving the user experience and reliability of the platform. It wasn't the most glamorous decision, but it was the right one. The following year, we saw a huge improvement in customer satisfaction, and our revenue grew by over 50%. We had found our stride. Today, my company is still growing, and we're now one of the leading platforms in the travel space. But the journey hasn't been easy, and I still look back on those early days with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. I went from having no idea what I was doing to running a successful business. But I've learned that entrepreneurship isn't just about having a great idea. It's about persistence, adaptability, and an unwavering belief that you can figure things out, no matter how many times you fail along the way. Looking back, I realized that the hardest part of my entrepreneurial journey was simply taking that first leap. I left behind a comfortable life for the unknown, and it wasn't easy. But if there's one piece of advice I'd give to aspiring entrepreneurs, it's this: don't be afraid to take risks. Yes, it will be hard. Yes, you'll face challenges. But the rewards, both personal and professional, are worth it. The journey is never as straightforward as you expect, but every mistake, every failure, and every setback teaches you something that will ultimately help you succeed. And for me, that's been the best part of the journey: learning, growing, and becoming someone I never imagined I could be. This is the story of how I went from broke and desperate to owning a thriving business. It's not an overnight success story, but a journey of grit, a little bit of luck, and lessons learned the hard way. Grab some popcorn, because this one's long. It all started when I was 25. I had just left my third job in 3 years, all of them dead-end office jobs with no room for growth, low pay, and no real purpose. I felt like I was constantly chasing something that didn't exist. I had an idea in my head that I could start my own business, but the problem was I had no clue where to start. I had no savings, a pile of student debt, and no special skills beyond being a decent writer. What I did have, though, was a mountain of dissatisfaction with the status quo and a drive that came from the frustration of being stuck in a rut. I moved back in with my mom for a while. It was a humbling experience, especially considering I'd always been independent and never imagined I'd end up in my late 20s sleeping in a room full of childhood memorabilia. My mom was supportive, but there was a tension that I felt every day. I had to make something happen or I would lose my mind. I spent weeks researching business ideas. At first, it was all about the big dreams, tech startups, apps, etc. But I quickly realized that I had neither the knowledge nor the capital to dive into those fields. I needed something that could be started with little money, something practical. After scouring forums, listening to podcasts, and reading whatever I could find, I settled on a simple idea, a content creation agency. It was 2017, and businesses were just starting to realize how important social media and content marketing were. Everyone wanted blogs, social media posts, videos, and email campaigns, but they didn't know how to create them. That's where I thought I could come in. With just my laptop and an old printer, I set out to make it happen. The first hurdle? I had no portfolio, no clients, no reputation, just an idea. But I knew if I didn't start now, I'd never start at all. I wrote a business plan, which mostly consisted of the vision I had for the agency and a rough strategy for getting clients. I didn't have much of a network to lean on, so I started cold emailing small businesses in my area. I didn't even know how to pitch properly, but I figured honesty was the best approach. I told them I was new to the game, but that I would work harder than anyone else to deliver value. To my surprise, I got a response. One of the small local coffee shops was interested. It wasn't a huge contract, but it was a start. I was going to do everything I could to make sure I nailed it. I created a few blog posts for their website, wrote some captions for their Instagram, and filmed a behind-the-scenes video of their coffee-making process. Honestly, it wasn't the most polished work, but it was something. And that something helped me secure more clients. Now, I know the first few clients are always the hardest to land. But once you get those initial wins under your belt, it's a lot easier to gain momentum. I continued reaching out to small businesses, offering low-cost packages in exchange for testimonials. Slowly but surely, I built a portfolio. I also started to refine my processes, learning what worked and what didn't. The business began to grow in fits and starts, with months of zero income followed by bursts of client work. I've been operating out of my mom's house for months, using her kitchen table as my office, but eventually, I could afford to rent a small office space. The first year was a grind. I didn't take a salary for the first 6 months. I didn't have the luxury of hiring people to help, so I was doing everything myself, writing, editing, managing clients, and handling the administrative work. There were many sleepless nights and a lot of moments when I thought about giving up. But there was always that little voice that told me I couldn't quit. Then came a turning point. I landed a client who was willing to pay a decent sum for a full social media strategy. This wasn't just the regular social media management work I had been doing. This was strategic planning, research, and detailed content calendars. It was a much bigger project, and I knew I had to deliver. I went all in. I hired a freelancer to help with the design work, another to handle some of the video editing, and I spent weeks planning and executing the strategy. The client was ecstatic, and they referred me to others. That was when the real growth began. With a solid portfolio and some excellent referrals, I could start charging higher rates. I hired a small team to help me with the workload, and the more we grew, the more we were able to refine our services. By year 2, we were handling content for multiple businesses, including some in industries I never imagined I'd work with. We had expanded from small local businesses to clients in tech, real estate, and even e-commerce. By year 3, we were scaling rapidly. My team had grown from just me and a couple of freelancers to a full-time staff of 5 people. I knew we had to stay on top of trends, so we made a concerted effort to be on the cutting edge of new social media platforms and marketing strategies. We started running paid ads for clients, exploring influencer marketing, and even creating branded content for YouTube channels. Despite all the growth, I still felt a bit unmoored. My identity had become so tied up in the business that I started to lose track of who I was outside of it. The constant hustle was exhausting, and I was close to burning out. That was when I made the decision to take a step back and focus more on leadership rather than execution. I spent less time writing and editing and more time working on the business, streamlining processes, improving the customer experience, and working with my team to set long-term goals. Fast forward to today. I'm now the CEO of a successful content agency with a staff of 15 full-time employees. We've worked with dozens of major brands, and while we're not a Fortune 500 company, we're doing well. The key to our success was never about being the cheapest or the fastest. It was about building long-term relationships with our clients, providing consistent value, and continuously improving. I'm also able to take time off when I need it. Last year, I took my first real vacation in over 4 years. I had the luxury of not being tethered to my laptop 24/7. It wasn't always like that, but it feels incredible now that I've built a team I trust and systems that run smoothly. So, what's the takeaway from this whole thing? If you're stuck, don't let the fear of failure hold you back. The beginning is always the hardest, and things will never be perfect, but if you're persistent and willing to learn from your mistakes, you can make it. The process isn't glamorous, and it's definitely not easy, but in the end, it's worth it. Just keep going. If you're thinking about starting a business, do it. But don't expect instant success. Build from the ground up, and remember that the road to entrepreneurship is filled with setbacks, but it's also full of growth and unexpected rewards. It's a marathon, not a sprint, but if you stick with it, you can change your life. I was 24 when I decided to take the plunge into entrepreneurship. To put things into perspective, I wasn't exactly an overnight success type of person. I had just finished my degree in marketing. I was working at a dead-end job at a call center, and I was completely broke. There was nothing glamorous about my life. I'd spend most of my days answering calls from customers frustrated about their internet bills, and most of my nights scrolling through Reddit or watching YouTube videos of entrepreneurs telling their success stories. They all had the same message: if I can do it, so can you. I had heard it 100 times, and I knew deep down that it was time for me to actually believe it. I had always been interested in tech and gadgets, but the reality of my situation kept me grounded. I didn't have the funds to start a business, let alone the confidence. But one night, I was sitting in my cramped apartment, staring at my old laptop screen when it hit me. I was wasting time. I could either continue to do nothing or use this free time to work on something that could change my life. The idea came to me out of nowhere. I had been getting annoyed with how difficult it was to find reliable, affordable phone accessories. I was constantly searching for phone cases, chargers, or screen protectors that were high quality, but everything seemed either too expensive or unreliable. A thought popped into my mind. What if I could make a business out of providing quality, affordable tech accessories? I didn't have a huge budget, so I began researching how to start a business without much money. I found countless blog posts and YouTube videos that encouraged starting small and scaling slowly. They spoke about starting with a niche, which was perfect for me because I had no plans to compete with big box stores or Amazon. I wanted to focus on something specific: phone accessories that were stylish, functional, and affordable. I started small, really small. I didn't even have a website at first. I bought a small batch of phone cases and screen protectors from a wholesaler, mostly focusing on unique designs. I remember spending hours crafting my first product descriptions and taking photos with my old camera. The website was bare bones, but it was a start. I used Shopify to set up my store because it was affordable and easy to use. Now, here's the thing about starting small. You can only go so far before you realize that if you don't start investing in your business, you'll hit a wall. I made a couple of sales in the first month, but it wasn't enough to pay rent or cover any of the bills. I was stuck in a cycle of buying inventory, selling a couple of items, and then having to buy more inventory. It was frustrating, but I was determined. The turning point came when I decided to reinvest everything I earned back into the business. I used my last paycheck to buy a batch of high-quality accessories from a different supplier, but this time I also paid for a professional website design. I wasn't a web developer, and I had no idea what I was doing, but I knew that a clean, professional-looking website would attract more customers. It felt like a risk, but at that point, I didn't have much to lose. It was either take the leap or give up. Within weeks, things started to change. I had learned a ton about digital marketing, especially Instagram and Facebook ads. I began running targeted ads for my products, focusing on the specific demographics I knew would be interested in stylish, affordable tech accessories. The ads were not perfect, but they worked. Slowly but surely, my sales began to climb. Now, here's the thing about social media. It's a double-edged sword. One minute you're getting a surge of sales, and the next, you're getting a surge of angry customers. I made mistakes. Plenty of them. My packaging wasn't the best at first, and I had customers complaining that their cases arrived damaged or late. I felt like a failure every time I received a negative email or review. But I refused to give up. I started contacting suppliers directly and negotiated better prices for shipping and packaging. I hired a part-time employee to help with customer service, and I started offering faster shipping to ensure that my customers had a better experience. By the time I hit my first year in business, I was making a decent income. It wasn't life-changing, but it was enough to cover my rent, pay off credit card debt, and give me the confidence to quit my call center job. I was living proof that it was possible to create something from nothing with just hard work and persistence. But the next challenge was scaling. The first year had been about surviving, but now I had to figure out how to thrive. I started reaching out to influencers and bloggers who were willing to promote my products. I wasn't able to afford big-name influencers, but I targeted micro-influencers who had smaller but highly engaged audiences. The results were incredible. I remember one influencer with only 5,000 followers posting about my brand, and the next thing I knew, my website was flooded with orders. In the second year, I took my business from a side hustle to a full-time gig. I was working 18-hour days, learning everything I could about SEO, email marketing, and influencer partnerships. It wasn't easy, and there were times I felt overwhelmed, but I had come too far to back down now. There were some major wins and huge losses along the way. One of the biggest mistakes I made was expanding my product line too quickly. I thought that if I added more products, I would make more sales. But I soon realized that I had spread myself too thin. I didn't have the budget to market everything, and as a result, sales plateaued. It was a tough lesson, but I cut back on new products and focused on improving the quality of my core items. That's when things really took off. Eventually, my little online store turned into a brand with a loyal customer base. It was no longer just about selling phone accessories. It was about building a lifestyle brand. I started offering custom products and expanding into other tech gadgets, and my brand was being recognized for its quality and style. Now, years later, I look back at the person I was when I first started. I was scared, broke, and uncertain about the future. But I never gave up, and I kept learning and pushing forward. My business now brings in more than enough to support myself, and I've built a team of people who are just as passionate about the company as I am. To anyone out there who's thinking about starting a business, just start. You don't have to have everything figured out. You don't have to have a huge budget. What you need is determination, persistence, and the willingness to learn from your mistakes. The road is long, and there will be plenty of moments when you want to quit, but keep going. The only way to fail is to stop trying. I'm not saying it's easy, but if I can do it, so can you. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.